added will show us those tunes at the top here. So now we want to sort out the metadata, the name, the artist, the genre, and the year as a minimum. So for instance, on this track here, the genre is tech house. I don't make that distinction. For me, house is fine, so I'm going to change the genre there to house. Apart from that, I'm happy with that one. This one here, the genre is other. Other doesn't mean anything to me. This is a pop song, so I'm going to change that to pop. This one here, Walking on Sunshine, original 12-inch version is not something I would bother keeping on there. I'm going to assume it's the original unless told otherwise, so I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm also going to change the genre there to pop, because to me that is a pop song. And this one here, the metadata is all messed up. This was a rip I did myself. So I'm going to change the artist and title to add all the information that's missing. And by the way, if you right click on a track and go to get info, it'll give you a more detailed panel with all the information about that track on. Now in our DJ Music Blueprint process, I've put 3 boxes next to each other here, which is kind of not what you're meant to do in flowcharts. But the reason I've done it like this is that here is where the way DJs work differs a lot, depending on whether they're using iTunes or whether they're using DJ software. Because some of the things in those 3 boxes you can do in iTunes, some of them you can't. All of them you can do in your DJ software. So right now I'm going to cover the ones that you can do in iTunes. After this little bit, we're going to move on to the main DJ software platforms and look at carrying on doing this stuff and how to do it over there as well. So bear with me, the principles are exactly the same. I'm going to talk to you about playlists. And remember, there are 3 types of playlists. General playlist, big playlists that we put stuff in that we're always going to want to keep there. So for instance, right-clicking in the playlist area here and having the new playlist selected gives me a new playlist. I'll call it Club. And let's just say that track, that track, and that track, and that track constitute tracks that I'm always going to want to play in club sets because they're clubby tracks. I can drag them into there, and now I have a playlist there called Club. And by using the View tab in iTunes, I can view it as a song list, for instance, just to get it back to looking similar to this view. So there's my club list. It's a manual playlist. I put them in there myself, and as I add new tunes, I can build this up. I could have another playlist down here called Party, for instance, and this is my more like kind of party tunes, my cheesy stuff, my mobile disco stuff, and again, I'll be picking those tunes out of here and dragging them into there. So I can maintain big lists like this, which are just manually updated by me with stuff that I want to play. So when I'm getting a party set together, I can go to the party list, look in there, and then I can be organizing my songs from that rather than from my main library. So that's the big list kind of idea. The smallest idea is to have little sets that are interesting to me that kind of like come and go. So for instance, if I had a great New Year's Eve disco tunes. Now that's not a big thing that I'm going to want to keep forever probably. I'm just getting it ready for a particular thought, or maybe I'm going to do a nice New Year's Eve mixtape or whatever. This is kind of stuff I'm working on. That's the point. It's not permanent. So in this set here, I might choose. And by the way, I'm not at all picking correct tunes for this kind of thing, but we will go to disco at least. So let's say I've decided that I want to have that tune, and that tune, and these are going to be my great New Year's Eve disco tunes. I will drag those into there, and there we go. There's my little set. So far so good. The thing is, I might end up with 50 little sets like that with 2 or 3 tunes in, and it's going to get very messy very quickly. So a nice thing about iTunes is that you can have a new playlist folder, and I can call this, mini mixes, for instance, and I can drag all those little sets into here. So now, in this little mini mixes folder, I could have dozens of these, and I can just close it like that. So it keeps everything nice and tidy. So it's worth working out how to nest stuff into other stuff if you're going to be doing a lot of experimenting with playlists, which I certainly encourage you to do. Now, another type of playlist, very, very important, is your next gig playlist. So your next gig playlist, you literally call it next gig or, Saturday's gig or whatever. This is the one that you put stuff in that you are planning on playing at that gig. Now, planning your playlist like this is one of the secrets of DJing with digital, because it means that you're not DJing out of your whole collection when you get to a gig. You're DJing out of a pre-prepared folder. You've done the homework. And again, It's just a case of going through your songs and selecting probably about double the number of songs that you actually think you're going to be DJing with, dragging them into that next gig playlist. And then you could again have a folder called archived gigs. So once you've played a gig, you could have a playlist folder where you put all those gigs, so they're not messing up your main playlist. So my next gig folder there, once I've played that gig, I might rename that gig and then just today's date or whatever, so that they're all separate from each other. Drop that into my archives. And again, in this archives now, all my gigs are building up, so it's great. I can look back in the future at what I played or what I took with me to gigs, but they're not going to be cluttering up my playlist area. So another kind of playlist, this is one of the areas that iTunes excels, but you can do it in most DJ software, as we're going to find out, is what's called a smart playlist. Now, smart playlists are awesome because they let you auto-populate a playlist according to certain rules. So, for instance, if I wanted to have a smart playlist to get my 90s rock music, well, I have a new smart playlist, and I go to genre, contains rock. Then I click the add button, and then year is less than 2000, and year is greater than 1989. Now I have a rock playlist here, 90s rock, and I don't have much 90s rock. Hey, it's not my scene. But there we go, all my tunes from the 1990s that are tagged rock here. And the beauty here is that when you add new songs to your collection that fulfill those criteria, they'll get added to your smart playlists. And so you don't have to do anything to keep those playlists up to date. And if you're pruning your collection and taking old stuff out, it'll disappear from the playlist as well. So smart playlists are very powerful, and I recommend you get involved and work out how to use those for your particular needs. So there's iTunes. I'm going to now move across and show you how to do this in Serato before moving on to the other DJ platforms. So let's rewind. We've got our tracks into our music library, and we want to use Serato to do what I just showed you in iTunes. So this means that we're kind of cutting out a program, because Serato is not only a place where we're going to edit our metadata, but also it's a place where we can do our playlisting and analyzing our music and, of course, playing our music. So it's simplifying things in a way. So the first thing we have to do, as ever, is add our tunes to Serato. Now, actually, I've started with a blank copy of Serato here with no music in it at all. But let's assume that we're going to add just the tunes from today, just to make it easy. So there's our tunes from today. I'm going to take those and I'm going to move back to Serato, drag them in and drop them onto the word all there at the top. That's one way of doing it. You can also do it via the file browser here, just by going to the same place and grabbing your music. It doesn't matter which way you do it. The point is you've got to tell it where it is, just like I added those tracks to iTunes. Now, those tracks are here. I can do exactly the same thing with regards to the metadata. I can edit it just in the same way. So I would be tidying up all the metadata here. But inside something like Serato or Traktor or Rekordbox, there's also another step which has to happen here. You can't do this in iTunes. And that is analyzing your music for DJ-specific information. So if I was to highlight all those tunes and drag them to analyze files, this is how it works in Serato, you can see that it's doing something. And what it's doing is looking at those files for the key, for the BPM, working out where the beats are, and working out the overall volume, working out what the waveform looks like. And what it ends up with when it's done that is a whole load of information about those tunes that's really useful to you when you're DJing. Because without that information, it's hard to use the advanced features of digital, like looping and syncing and so on. You won't have proper waveforms to look at. And worse than that, Serato will attempt to do those things on the fly when you're DJing. And what you don't want when you're DJing is what you're seeing here, which is tunes being analysed, albeit one at a time, because it'll happen when you load a track onto the deck. You don't want that to be happening because it's going to slow your machine down, it could cause glitches and so on. So an absolutely essential step in your DJ music blueprint is analysing your music in your DJ software. And as we're watching it now in Serato, I'll show you when we come to the other softwares, but we won't go into it in so much detail. Just be aware that you have to do this. What I will show you in the other softwares, and what I'm also going to show you here in Serato, is something that's highly important, and that is to understand the options you have when you're analyzing your files. Because if you don't understand the options you have and you don't understand how to set them, you won't be able to spot errors, and you might be undoing good work you've done earlier. So let me give you an example of that. Remember earlier I showed you using mixed-in key to work out the key of your music. The mixed-in key algorithm is really, really good for working that out, and a lot of people really like to use it. So if you wanted to use mixed-in key to work out your music, you wouldn't then do the same thing in your DJ software, because at the very best, you're going to be duplicating the effort. At the very worst, you're going to be wiping out all the good work you did in mixed-in key. Here's another example. Quite often, DJ software guesses the BPM of your music kind of correctly, but it'll guess it at double the speed or half the speed that it should be. In your DJ software, when you're setting the analysis, you can tell it to put it within a certain range. So if you're analyzing some laid-back house and some funk and disco, you can set the range nice and low so it doesn't accidentally guess really fast BPMs. And if you're analyzing really fast BPMs like drum and bass or techno or something, you can tell it to kind of like not bother with the hip-hop side of things, so it won't accidentally guess the speed at half the speed it should be. So it's important to look at the way your software analyzes your music and look at the options that your software gives you when you're analyzing your music, so that you've got a chance to set those to something that makes sense to you before you start doing all that analysis. Otherwise, you might end up with loads of errors. In Serato, those settings are here. Here's where we tell it to do the key or not, and here's where we can set the BPM range in order that it makes fewer errors. Now, if you do have errors, the easiest way to spot them is to sort by BPM and look at the very high end of your BPMs for slow tunes and at the very low end of the BPMs for fast tunes. There's only a few tunes here, and it's done them all correctly. So if you spot a hip-hop track with a 190 BPM or a drum and bass track with a 90 BPM, you know that you have to halve or double that. And in fact, there's an easy way of halving or doubling it in Serato. You double-click the BPM, hold down the Alt and press up or down arrow, and it'll double or half the BPM, as you can see going on there. So, listening to your music when you're offline in Serato is simply a case of dragging it onto the top here and hitting play. And you can audition your music and so on. Remember I told you one of the really nice things about preparing your music is putting a cue point right on the first beat. So if that's the beat you're going to start DJing on, then you can stick a cue point right there, and I've actually got lots of cue points already here. There's my first beat. There's a bit further on and so on. Setting cue points like this ahead of time is a really nice way of saving you the work every time you load a track up. And I thoroughly recommend you set at least that first cue point on the first beat, because it just means it saves you having to do that extra piece of work when you're maybe wanting to mix the track in really quickly in a DJ set. Now, if you actually want to DJ with this, plug a controller in and it'll turn into the familiar view with the decks and so on. But that's not for this video. What I did want to show you on this video is using the crates, because they're called crates rather than playlists in Serato, but the way it works is exactly the same. So if I wanted to do a crate, for instance, for my club music, just like I did in iTunes, I can just write club here, go back to all my music and start dragging tracks into that club folder. If I wanted to do a smart playlist, I could hit the blue one here with the S on it, start adding rules. So exactly the same thing. I can start putting the year in and so on, and to do the filters as I was showing you in iTunes, and then I can add my smart playlist that way. There's my smart playlist there. Also, you can nest playlists. So if I had a playlist here and I called it experimental ideas, I could then start putting other playlists into there like this. And as I showed you before, you can just fold them away. And it's the same principle if you're going to have playlists for your next gig and so on. So doing that stuff is really simple in Serato. Now, if you're really on the ball today, you might have been thinking, where does Serato store all this information? In other words, I might have my music library backed up, I'm keeping it in Dropbox, but where's Serato storing all the info about the waveforms and so on? Well, it has its own database, which means you want to be backing that up as well. So it's actually over in your music folder. If you head to the music folder, or my music folder on your Windows PC, there is a folder called Serato. Forget the one that's called Serato Backup, go to the one that's called Serato, and this folder needs to be backed up. So you could, for instance, just drag it to your Dropbox and keep it in there, back that up every week or whenever you do this, and then you've got a backup there to come back to should you ever have a problem. Although of course you could use other ways, and at the end of this video we're going to talk about other ways of backing stuff up as well as Dropbox. So you've seen this stuff in Serato, you've seen it in iTunes. Just before we leave Serato, I want to show you how to get that iTunes stuff in here, because you might have noticed it down this side here, we haven't got any iTunes. So if you've done your work in iTunes, go over to Library and Display, click Show iTunes Library, and then your iTunes library will appear here. There it is. And you can DJ from it. Here's all the work I was doing in iTunes earlier. So again, you're still going to need to analyze this music if it hasn't been analyzed by your Serato installation yet, and the best way of doing that is just hitting the music tag on iTunes and dragging everything to analyze. And you can also sort by date added to find the new tracks so you're not reanalyzing everything all the time. So over in Traktor, exactly the same principles. It's just knowing where to find stuff. So in your settings, there's a file management setting where you can analyze new imported tracks on import there. So that means that every time you introduce a new track, it will analyze it. You can also set it to analyze new tracks when loading into a deck. So that means if something hasn't been analyzed and you drag it onto a deck, it's going to happen. And then below file management in analyze options, you get the options about the BPM range, where it will just guess the BPM range, or you can set the range that applies, or that's most likely to apply, as I explained in Serato. Also, it can automatically set the beat grid when detecting BPM. We'll talk more about beat grids in a later tutorial, but beat grids are an important part of mixing with digital software, and also storing the first beat marker as a hot cue, which is again automatically doing what I showed you manually in Serato. And you also have a couple of key options there as well. So worth knowing those before you do any of this stuff. So importing into Traktor, a couple of ways. You can do it in exactly the same way that I did with Serato. In other words, you can go to your My Music library, select all the new stuff. And again, I'm using the date added column down here to help me with that. Grab hold of that and then switch back to Traktor and move up to the track collection here and just drop it on there, exactly the same as I did in Serato. So now it's given me the chance to double check everything it's going to do on analyzing. You can set some more options here, including whether you want to do key or not at all, whether you want to auto set gain and so on. And then when you're happy with those, you can just hit I'm going to go back to all and just let it do the whole thing. Just hit analyze and it'll start analyzing, and you can see down here at the bottom it's analyzing these tunes. It's going to take a little while because my poor little computer is filming all this as well. But when it's finished, those are all going to be analyzed. You can also introduce tracks to the collection by going down to your Explorer and grabbing the tracks straight from the same folder in the Explorer window, which is exactly what I just did then, just by switching to a different window in my operating system. So there we go, my music is in there. I can load that and then find the tracks in here in the same way and just pull them onto the track collection window here as well. So while these are showing here, these are showing because I've just gone to a folder that contains them, but they're not imported or analyzed. If I go back to my track collection, the only ones that are imported or analyzed are the ones that are here. So be aware that you're importing tracks into your library software physically. You have to do that or else it doesn't really know they exist. So having said all that, again, we're going to look at where to back up all this stuff, because there's no point doing this work unless you're backing it up. Now, in the case of Traktor, your library hangs out in two places, or rather the information that you want to back up hangs out in two places. In the music folder in Traktor, you have any recordings you've made, any samples that come with Traktor, and any other content that you've imported that's to do with Traktor itself. So this is actual musical stuff. But the most important place to back up is actually in your documents folder. And in your documents folder, you have a native instruments folder, which has an instance for every version of Traktor you've ever had. So you want to go to the latest one, which in this case, at the time of recording this, is 2.11.0. And in here is all the stuff that would be a real pain if you lost it, such as the information that's been analysed in all the stuff we were just doing a second ago. So this whole folder, you want to make a copy of it and put it somewhere else. You might want to do it in Dropbox, for instance, as I did with the Serato one, but back it up regularly because you're going to want that information if anything ever happens to your collection. Now, playlists in Traktor don't work as well as they do in all other DJ software. It doesn't have smart playlists and it's a bit clunky, but that said, same with anything, you can get used to it and it's absolutely fine. So let me show you how to do it. You hit the left-hand column, your browser tree, and go to the playlist section here. And then you can right-click on there and go create playlist. And you can also create playlist folders here. So I could call a new folder experiments, for instance, as I did over in Serato. And that folder appears here. And then within this folder, I can then create playlists for all my weird and wonderful mini disco mix. I've got a thing about disco today, haven't I? And lots more in there. So that's how you do it. But there's, as I say, no smart playlists here. You also quite nicely can have your playlist up here as well. So you can have playlists that matter the most to you at the top in Traktor. Because playlists are a little bit clunky and a little bit limited in Traktor, it's the software that we find most DJs hanging on in there with iTunes in. So if you are one of those DJs, you think that iTunes looks a lot better and you just want to play from your iTunes stuff in Traktor, you wouldn't be alone. iTunes is down here, and all the work in iTunes is here. Traktor shows you these files that are grayed out because it tells you that they're not known to it. So when you're working in iTunes, you have to import them in exactly the same way I've shown you, just grabbing them and bringing them up to your track collection in order to import and analyze them. Very, very important. And once you've done that, you can DJ straight out of your iTunes collection right there in Traktor. And it's as if you've done all that work in Traktor with your playlist and so on. So that's another option to consider. So over in Rekordbox, and by the way, you can alter the metadata in Traktor, just like I did in Serato. Click on the bit you want to change and change it. The only place you can't do it in Traktor is in the iTunes library. It won't let you alter metadata in there. You've got to do it in the collection. So let's go to our music, because you won't be surprised to know that it's exactly the same over here for Rekordbox as it is for everything else. I'm going to go to my music. I'm going to take the new tracks and I'm going to grab them, and I'm going to switch over to Rekordbox and I go to my collection, drop them on there, and they're all going to import there. Now, let's look at the options for importing in Rekordbox. You hit the cog at the top there and go to analysis. So we've got two types of analysis, normal and dynamic. Dynamic is better for music which isn't straight BPM, which isn't electronic. Again, we've got a BPM range. You're going to be used to looking at this by now. We have the folder where your analysis is kept. So this is a backup of the actual analysis it's done. Now this is different to the stuff you're going to want to back up when you back up your data, and I'll show you in a minute why you don't really need to worry too much about this right now. Now this is an interesting one, key analysis. You can analyze key on import, and you can write the value to the ID3 tag, which puts it in the file, or you can let Pioneer keep it in the database. So if you've already got something in the MP3, for instance, that you did in mixed in key, you can let Pioneer do it as well, but it will keep it somewhere else. So just little small things it's worth keeping an eye on here to make sure you have it doing exactly how you want to. The analysis process here is just about the speed of your computer. When you've got all that set up, you're done. The tracks are analyzing here. When they finish analyzing, there we go. Our waveforms are all here to show you they've been analyzed. To add the first cue point, load up, find the place that your first beat is at, and hit Q and A. There's a cue point. Cue point A is dropped there, and that's it for doing that part of it. Now the playlists work in exactly the same way as in Serato and in iTunes. You've got intelligent playlists, they call them here, rather than smart crates or smart playlists, but it's exactly the same thing. An intelligent playlist has got all the choices of rules which allow you to set up something dynamic going on there. Also, you can just set normal playlists as well, like this. And you can have playlist folders as well. So if you want to add a folder to put your playlist in. So this is all exactly the same as I've shown you 3 times already now. And iTunes is in here as well. So again, there's nothing in here that is nothing you haven't seen on the other software. Again, you can see that the iTunes music isn't analyzed, so you're going to have to import and analyze it. This important thing to bear in mind here is your DJ software does have to see that music and have a chance to analyze it, no matter where it's come from, whether that's iTunes or somewhere else. Now, backing up your collection in Rekordbox is a little bit different. If you go to File and Library, you can back up Library. And it will say this operation may require a long time. And then when you hit OK, you get the option of backing up music files as well, which is quite nice because you could put the whole thing, all of the database and all the music on an external drive. If you want the option of backing the whole thing up somewhere completely differently, so you've got a completely different physical backup, well, your choice is there in here. And unlike in the other software, which automatically keeps your library up to date, when you close the program, it just updates everything. In Rekordbox, you can actually say, right, I've done my work. Right now, I want to back this up, which is what I'm doing here. And you hit yes, and then it'll give you the chance to choose where you put your Rekordbox backup. And obviously, that's going to be somewhere safe. So that's how Rekordbox does this stuff. Just before we finish with collections, I want to just show you something that I think people get wrong quite a lot of the time. So I'm going to go back to my Finder, back to my music collection. And this time, I'm going to take the whole lot, and I'm going to put the whole lot into my collection here. Now, none of this music's analysed, and that's fine for what I want to show you, because I want to talk to you about the difference between playlists, sorting by column, and filtering. Because a lot of people think that because they've got this smart playlist, intelligent crates, all that kind of stuff, and because they've got the ability to nest playlists and do a bit of this and a bit of that, that it's almost like when people first got word processors and they used every font in the collection just because they could. It's worth thinking about what you're using playlists for and whether it's possible to do that stuff without going to all that trouble, because the more complicated you make your music management system, the less likely you are to remember what you did and to keep it up. So, for instance, if you want to sort by genre, you can click the genre column and there's everything in a particular genre. You want to play rock for half an hour? Click your genre and go to the rock section. You don't really need a playlist with that stuff in it, because it's so easy to just click genre at the top and do that. Now, if you're always playing a set of that type, yeah, maybe. But if it's just something you do every now and then, not often necessary. Same with other tags as well. Just click the column, and you can alter in all software by right-clicking the kind of columns that are available to you. So it's worth thinking about just sorting columns to find what you want. Now, like all that, you've got the filter. You've got the ability to just type in a search term. So if you wanted to search for something with the word love in the title, there's all my tracks with love in the title. You don't need a smart playlist looking for the word love and putting them out into a playlist and thinking you've been really clever, because you've just got that, you've got the search box, and that's there on all software. And search boxes have got a lot of options as well. You can choose what you search within the search box. So it's worth thinking again whether you need to do anything permanently or whether you can just quickly use the filter search in order to do that. For stuff in the areas that I've talked to you about, big playlists for club or bar or whatever, little experiments where you really want to keep practicing with the same tracks, and crucially, your playlist for the next gig, I certainly recommend using playlists. But think twice before you do everything in playlists, because as I say, just sorting by column and filtering could be the right way to do that, and it saves an extra layer of work that you've then got to keep up in order for your DJ Music library blueprint to continue functioning properly. Now, this is an external hard drive. This is something that I recommend all DJs have. That is the equivalent of like a bunch of record crates or a wall of CDs. That is how I can hold my music collection and say it exists. That's got it all on it. And it's so important to have this extra backup. It is not good enough to have it backed up in the cloud, just in Dropbox or Google Cloud or iCloud or whatever. It's not good enough to have that, because you also going to have a problem should someone accidentally delete all the files and then they sync the deletion up to the cloud. Bang, they've gone everywhere. So I thoroughly recommend you buy one of these. You buy an external drive and you set it up and you copy everything onto it one way, and then either unplug it and put it somewhere very safe, like literally in a safe or something, or keep it somewhere where you're confident it's going to be there next time you go looking for it. And one program I really recommend, you can get it for the Mac, there's similar programs for PC, is this one called DropSync. And DropSync's really clever because it lets you set up folders that automatically sync whenever they change. So what's good about this is you can set up your music collection and the folder where your DJ software keeps its data, and they will automatically update one way to something like this. So then if you accidentally delete your whole Dropbox library and it goes bang, 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 and it deletes in the cloud and on all your other computers, you've still got a backup on here. It's so important. That feeling of knowing your library exists somewhere physical is so important. And I leave this plugged into my router, which is somewhere safe and secure. And I know that whatever I do, and however stupid I am, and if I accidentally delete a folder on Dropbox or whatever, it's all been backed up one way here as well, and I've got a chance of restoring it all and getting it back. So we've covered an awful lot in this video. We've covered how to get your music into an area where you can work on it. Then we've covered fixing the file names, covered checking the quality, what to do about it if the quality isn't there. I've covered stuff you should do to it before you admit it to your music collection. Then when you get it into your music collection, how to fix the metadata, how to analyze and import it into your DJ software, and how to use folders or playlists or crates or smart crates or intelligent folders or whatever they call them in your particular system to slice and dice your music. But we've also talked about when it's probably not a good idea to do that, because you can sort by column or you can use